Good evening, friends, and welcome back to the First Age of Middle-earth series. Tonight's story begins with a mistaken pardon. The Valar released the Dark Lord Melkor, believing he had repented. Melkor, once free, corrupted the wisest of the Noldor elves with lies and suspicion. And at the heart of this conflict was Fëanor and the three Silmarils he created, which held the light of the world. Thus, a greed for treasure completely changed the entire world. So before you get ready to relax, please give a like and subscribe. Only if you truly enjoy my content, of course. Also, let me know in the comments what city you're in and what time it is. I'd love to know what kind of night my voice is keeping you company through. Now, dim the lights, and with the sound of the bells, let's enter tonight's story. The story begins in a place called the Mahanaxar, the Ring of Doom of the Valar. It was situated outside the western gates of Valinor, the golden city of Valinor, a solemn place decreed by Manwë, king of the gods, where the Valar would gather to decide the fates of the world. At this moment, the solemn atmosphere in the ring was heavier than ever before, for a prisoner was about to end his long sentence. This prisoner was none other than Melkor, once the most powerful of the Ainur, now the source of all evil. 3 ages prior, at the dawn of the Elves' awakening, the Valar, to protect the firstborn children of Ilúvatar, launched the earth-shattering War of the Powers. They broke through Utumno, the evil fortress Melkor had built deep underground, bound him, and brought him back to Valinor. The Valar followed the laws they themselves had set, an iron rule of order and justice. They had decreed that Melkor would be imprisoned in the halls of Mandos for 3 full ages, after which his case would be reviewed and he would have another chance to plead for pardon. Now, 3 ages had passed. Time seemed to have left no trace in the eternal land of Aman. But for Melkor, imprisoned in solitude, every moment was a long and calculated wait. He was brought out from the inescapable halls of Mandos and once again taken to the Ring of Doom. He concealed all his pride and power, prostrating himself before Manwë's throne, his posture so humble it was moving. He begged for forgiveness for all his past evils, his words filled with remorse, his voice sounding incredibly sincere. He swore that if he were forgiven, even to become the humblest being in Valinor, he would do everything in his power to aid the Valar in all their good deeds, especially to heal the many wounds he had inflicted upon the world. It was a masterful performance, and the audience was comprised of the purest and most benevolent beings in the universe. When that great war ended, and a great cloud rose over the northern ruins, obscuring the stars, the Valar brought Melkor back to Valinor, his hands and feet bound, and his eyes blindfolded. He was brought to the Ring of Doom. There he prostrated himself at Manwë's feet and begged for pardon. But his plea was denied, and he was cast into the prison of Mandos, a place from which neither Vala, elf, nor mortal man could escape. Melkor was sentenced to be imprisoned there for 3 ages, until his case was reconsidered, or he could plead for pardon for himself again. This record clearly shows that the Valar's actions were not impulsive. They followed their own solemn judgment, which was both a sign of their respect for order and a foreshadowing of the tragedy to come. They believed that a system, a set of rules, was sufficient to measure and constrain everything. However, the one they were about to face was a subverter of rules, He looked down at the soughing and scraping Melkor at his feet, listening to his remorseful words. Manwë's heart was filled with pity, a pity that was his noblest quality and was about to become his most fatal weakness. He measured Melkor's bottomless dark heart with his own pure one and concluded that Melkor's evil had been cured. Thus, Manwë ordered Melkor's release. This was a catastrophic misjudgment. Tolkien, in his later notes, reflected on this, calling it the weakest and most unwise of all Manwë's actions. This was not because Manwë was foolish. On the contrary, it was because he was too good. He could read Melkor's heart, but what he read was a meticulously woven, false exterior. He could not see that beneath that shell, the iron gates of Melkor's heart had closed forever. This presents a profound philosophical dilemma. Pure good by its very nature cannot fully understand and predict a being that has completely embraced nothingness and malice. Goodwill operates on principles of hope, redemption, and forgiveness, while Melkor's principle of action is to exploit all of these. Not all of the other Valar were as optimistic as Manwë. Tulkas, the valiant warrior who had thrown Melkor to the ground before the gates of Utumno, would clench his fists whenever he saw his former enemy walking freely in the streets of Valmar. He never believed in Melkor's repentance. Ulmo, the Vala who dwelled deep in the outer sea, whose wisdom was as profound as the ocean, also remained wary of Melkor. However, they all submitted to Manwë's judgment, because those who defend authority against rebellion must not themselves rebel. For Manwë, being free from evil himself, could not comprehend it. And he knew that in the beginning, in the thought of Ilúvatar, Melkor had been as he, and he saw not the depths of Melkor's heart, and did not perceive that all love had departed from him forever. This commentary accurately captures the core of the tragedy. Manwë's judgment was based on a logical premise, that all things have the potential for good. This premise holds true for a perfect world, but for a world tainted by free will, this premise itself becomes a fatal blind spot. Melkor was granted parole, but he was not allowed to leave Aman. He was required to live within the city of Valmar, under the constant watch of the Valar. However, this watch was already clouded by his superb acting. He appeared humble and helpful, offering many useful suggestions and assistance to the elves and Valar, with his vast knowledge and unparalleled skills. Many were deceived by him, beginning to believe that the former Dark Lord had truly turned over a new leaf. He focused his main efforts on the Noldor elves. Among the three kindreds of elves, the Noldor were the most intelligent. Their thirst for knowledge was unquenchable, and their pursuit of craftsmanship reached the pinnacle. They were the most favored students of Ole, the great smith among the Valar. Melkor saw their desire, and also the pride and discontent behind this desire. Like a patient gardener, he began to sow seeds of poison in this fertile soil. He walked among the Noldor, his words like honey, yet wrapped in the most sinister lies. He shared with them profound knowledge, secrets that the Valar had deemed the time not yet right to impart. His words were always so clever that many who heard him would in memory believe that the thoughts were born of their own reasoning. He looked upon the happiness and splendor of Valinor with eyes full of jealousy and hatred. He looked upon the children of Ilúvatar sitting at the feet of the Valar, and a blazing fire of hate ignited in his heart. He looked at the brilliant gems crafted by the skilled hands of the Noldor, and a greedy desire grew in his heart. However, among all the Noldor, there was one who held the deepest contempt and hatred for him from the very beginning. That was Fëanor, the eldest son of Finwë. Fëanor, this spirit of fire to Asama, whose mind and skill were peerless in his generation, never believed a single word from Melkor and was the first to give him a contemptuous name, Morgoth. This sharp, undisguised hostility planted the first spark for the storm that would later sweep across the world. But all that Melkor did and said at that time seemed virtuous and fair, and the Valar and Eldar who sought his aid benefited from his help and counsel. So after a while, he was granted freedom to go about the land of Valinor, and it seemed to Manwë that the evil of Melkor had been cured. This false image of peace was Melkor's most outstanding creation. Without using any force, merely through words and pretense, he successfully lulled the vigilance of the gods, winning for himself precious time and space. The golden age of Valinor, at its most glorious peak, had quietly welcomed the prelude to its dusk. The release of Melkor is a crucial philosophical juncture in Tolkien's cosmology. It explores a profound question. How does a system built on absolute goodwill, order, and hope contend with an entity whose very essence is subversion and nothingness? Manwë's decision was not one of foolishness, but a systemic failure, a fundamental limitation exposed when pure good confronts absolute evil. This event reveals an asymmetrical advantage of evil. Manwë and the Valar abide by the rules and moral codes they themselves established, such as keeping their promise to review the case after 3 ages, offering a chance for repentance, and acting with compassion. These are all manifestations of good, the cornerstones that uphold their social order. However, Melkor is bound by no rules. He understood the psychology of the Valar. He knew Manwë's compassion was his weakness, and he knew their respect for due process was a loophole to be exploited. Therefore, he could use the Valar's virtues against them without any burden. Goodwill was weaponized. This is a common sight in real-world conflicts. Open, tolerant systems often find themselves at a disadvantage when facing adversaries who see openness as an opportunity and tolerance as weakness. The opponent doesn't play by the rules, while you must adhere to them, creating a strategic asymmetry. Secondly, this explores the limits of understanding. Manwë, being free from evil himself, could not comprehend it. This is not just emotional naivety, but a cognitive barrier. The mindset of good is constructive, seeking harmony and coexistence. It cannot truly empathize with a mindset driven solely by destruction, hatred, and self-aggrandizement. Manwë could analyze Melkor's words and actions, but he could not truly empathize with the motives behind them, because those motives were non-existent in his worldview. He could see the open gates of Melkor's heart, but not the iron doors barred forever behind them. This leads to an unsettling conclusion. To fully understand and effectively combat certain forms of extreme evil, must one be tainted by its logic to some degree? Manwë's purity was both his source of strength and his cognitive prison. Finally, this event sets the tone for the entire tragedy of the First Age. Destruction comes not from external force, but from internal corruption. After his release, Melkor's most potent weapons were not the brute force of his Utumno era, but lies, rumors, and psychological manipulation. He didn't need to defeat the Valar. He only needed to make the children of the Valar, the Noldor elves, turn towards division and self-destruction. The fall of Valinor, at its root, was not because Melkor's power overwhelmed the Valar, but because the Valar's own virtues were exploited. Their goodness turned into a fatal weakness. This is a tragic revelation about the nature of conflict. The noblest qualities can become the most vulnerable Achilles' heel when facing an opponent without a bottom line. In the history of the Noldor, and indeed in the chronicles of all the children of Ilúvatar, no name shines brighter than Fëanor, and none bears more glory and sorrow. His mother, Míriel, named him Fëanor, meaning spirit of fire, a name that accurately foretold the essence of his life, as fiery, brilliant, and creative as a flame, yet also filled with destructive passion and irrepressible pride. His talents were comprehensive, almost perfect. The texts record that he was the mightiest in all parts of body and mind, in valor, in endurance, in beauty, in understanding, in skill, in strength and subtlety alike, of all the children of Ilúvatar. And a bright flame was in him. This flame was both the source of his genius and the root of his tragedy. His birth itself was an intertwining of legend and tragedy. His mother, Míriel, exhausted all her life force in bearing him, so much so that after giving birth, she said to King Finwë, "Never again shall I bear child, for strength that would have nourished the life of many has gone forth into Fëanor." Soon after, her spirit departed from her body and went to the halls of Mandos, becoming the first elf to pass away in Aman, an unprecedented event in the undying Blessed Realm. This unique tragedy was deeply etched into Fëanor's character. Having lost his mother at a young age, his love for his father, Finwë, became exceptionally focused and intense, while also breeding resentment towards Finwë's later remarriage and his two half-brothers born to his stepmother, Indis, Fingolfin, and Finarfin. This rift within the family was later skillfully exploited by Melkor, becoming one of the triggers for the unrest of the Noldor. Fëanor's talents blossomed to their fullest during the peaceful years of Valinor. He studied under the great craftsman Mahtan, who was one of Ole's favorite Noldoran disciples. From his father-in-law, Fëanor learned profound knowledge of metals and gems, pushing these skills to unprecedented heights. His wife, Nerdanel, daughter of Mahtan, with her wisdom and patience, was for a long time the only one who could quell the fire in his heart, and she bore him 7 sons. However, even Nerdanel's wisdom could not ultimately restrain Fëanor's heart, which was increasingly consumed by pride and possessiveness. Fëanor was driven by the fire of his own heart only, working ever swiftly and alone. And he asked the aid and sought the counsel of none in Aman, great or small, save only and for a little while of Nerdanel the Wise, his wife. This description accurately portrays Fëanor's image: a solitary genius, a self-sufficient creator, whose world was constructed of his own will and talent, tolerating little interference from outsiders. This extreme self-reliance both led to his greatness and doomed him to inevitable conflict with the world around him. Before creating the greatest masterpiece of his life, Fëanor's ingenuity and skill had already left countless treasures for Valinor and later Middle-earth. Any one of these lesser works would have been enough to make a craftsman's name legendary. But for Fëanor, they were merely a few waves in the ocean of his creativity. He perfected the Elven writing system. Building upon the Sarati script created by Rumil, Fëanor designed a more elegant and logical system of writing symbols, later known as tengwar, meaning letters. This writing system, due to its elegance and precision, was adopted by many later races and became one of the most widespread scripts in the world of Arda. He also mastered the art of capturing light. The Fëanorian lamps he made contained a clear blue light that could not be extinguished by wind or quenched by water. This can be seen as an early exploration for his later creation of the Silmarils. His initial attempt to give tangible form to intangible light. Another of his far-reaching creations was the Palantiri, or the seeing stones. These indestructible crystal balls allowed a user to see distant places and even communicate telepathically with users of other stones. He made more than one stone, the largest of which, the Master Stone, was placed in the Tower of Avalone on the lonely isle of Tolaresea, capable of monitoring all other stones. These stones were later gifted to the faithful of Numenor and brought to Middle-earth at the end of the Second Age, becoming key elements in many subsequent major events. All these works showcased Fëanor's extraordinary wisdom and skill. He was not just a craftsman, but an inventor, a magician who transformed abstract concepts into concrete reality. However, all these achievements would pale in comparison to his greatest work. In the era when the light of the two trees of Valinor reached its zenith, an unprecedented idea arose in Fëanor's heart. Perhaps he foresaw that the light was destined to fade. Or perhaps it was simply the supreme desire of an artist at his peak. He wanted to permanently preserve the living, intertwined silver and golden light of the two trees, making it imperishable. Thus, he began a long and secret work. He poured all his knowledge, power, and subtle skill into it. He first created an unprecedented substance called silema. It appeared like crystal, but was harder than diamond. No force within the kingdom of Arda could mar or break it. Then, through a technique known to none, he succeeded in blending the silver light of Telperion and the gold of Lorelin, and sealed this living substance, mixed with the light of both, within 3 great diamond-like gems. These 3 gems were the Silmarils. They were not merely gems. They were alive. They radiated their own light, as if possessing an inner fire. They would joyfully absorb external light and then reflect it in even more wondrous colors. When they were created, all of Aman marveled and rejoiced. The Valar also marveled at Fëanor's masterpiece. Varda, Queen of the Stars, personally hallowed the 3 gems, giving them sacred properties, and Varda hallowed the Silmarils, so that thereafter no mortal flesh, nor hands unclean, nor anything of evil might touch them. But it was scorched and withered, and Mandos foretold that the fates of Arda, of sea and land and air, lay locked within them. This hallowing and prophecy elevated the status of the Silmarils to an unparalleled height. They were no longer just Fëanor's personal works, but the pivot upon which the fate of the entire world turned. They were the ultimate expression of Valinor's splendor, the pinnacle of elven craft. And because of this, they became the ultimate target of greed and strife. At first, Fëanor would generously wear the Silmarils on his brow during festivals, sharing their radiance with everyone. But gradually, a shadow began to envelop his heart. His love for these peerless treasures he had created himself slowly evolved into a morbid, greedy possessiveness. He began to begrudge letting others see them, Except for his father Finwë and his 7 sons, he allowed no one to approach the gems. He locked them in the deepest vault of the fortress of Formenos, worrying day and night for their safety. He gradually forgot that the brilliant light within the gems did not originate from himself, but was a gift from the 2 trees. The pride of the Creator completely overwhelmed the reverence due to the source. At the same time, another person also developed an uncontrollable desire for the Silmarils. When Melkor saw these gems, he coveted the Silmarils, and the memory of their radiance was a gnawing fire in his heart. A creator and a destroyer, their gazes focused on the same goal. A world-sweeping tragedy had become inevitable. Fëanor's love and Melkor's hate would ultimately manifest in the same way: possession at any cost. For Fëanor began to love the Silmarils with a greedy love, and was unwilling to let anyone see them, save his father and his 7 sons. And he seldom remembered now that the light within them was not his own. This short sentence accurately captures the essence of Fëanor's fall. He transformed from a sub-creator, an artist who shared and added to the beauty of the world, into an owner who tried to possess that beauty for himself. He forgot that he was merely a conduit for the light, not the source. This forgetting is the beginning of all tragedy. The creation of the Silmarils established a core metaphysical law in Tolkien's fantasy cosmology. A law that found its ultimate expression later in the One Ring. When a sub-creator pours their own essence, the elvish Fëa, meaning soul or spiritual power, into an external object, that object is no longer a mere creation. It becomes an external vessel for the Creator's essence, both an extension of their power and their most profound weakness. This law profoundly explains why both the Silmarils and the One Ring had such a powerful hold on their creators. Fëanor exhausted his spirit in creating the Silmarils, so much so that he admitted he could never replicate such a masterpiece. When the Valar asked him to break the gems to revive the 2 trees, he cried out in anguish, "If I must break them, I shall break my heart, and I shall be slain." This was not an emotional exaggeration, but a metaphysical fact. His life force was intrinsically linked to the Silmarils, and their destruction was equivalent to the destruction of a part of himself. This is identical to the relationship between Sauron and the One Ring. Sauron poured his power, will, and evil into the ring, making it a tool to dominate the other rings. However, this also meant his power had an external anchor. As long as the ring existed, he could not be completely destroyed. But once the ring was destroyed, his power would vanish with it. A symbiotic relationship, or more accurately, a reversal of the master-slave dynamic, formed between the Creator and the creation. This act of creation inevitably leads to a paranoid, jealous possessiveness. Fëanor's greedy love for the Silmarils and Sauron's obsession with the ring are essentially the same psychological state. They cannot bear to have their essence out of their control. This work, as their greatest achievement, also becomes the prison of their souls. They are no longer masters of their creation, but have become slaves to it. From a real-world perspective, this can be interpreted as a profound allegory about obsession. Whether it is an artist's fixation on their work, a scientist's attachment to an invention, or an entrepreneur's desire for control over their empire. When a person invests their entire identity, value, and meaning of existence in an external object, they lose their inner freedom. This external object, no matter how brilliant, becomes a potential one ring. Its gain or loss will directly determine the creator's rise or fall. Through the story of the Silmarils, Tolkien reveals in the First Age this tragic truth that runs through his entire mythological system. The greatest creativity, if not constrained by wisdom and humility, often leads to the most profound enslavement. The Silmarils are therefore not just jewels. They are the one ring of the First Age, the root of the elves' pride and destruction, pre-writing the tragic blueprint for all future conflicts. After the Silmarils were created and Melkor regained his freedom, Valinor entered a period of false peace. During this time, the future Dark Lord revealed his most terrifying aspect. He no longer relied on world-shattering brute force, but thus launched a precise, insidious, and remarkably modern psychological warfare campaign. His target was clear, the Noldor, because they most desired knowledge and had the greatest skill, which made them both the most valuable pawns in Melkor's eyes and the group most susceptible to corruption by pride and suspicion. Like a modern propaganda master, Melkor did not spread crude rumors directly. Instead, he carefully wove a fake news narrative containing partial truths, making it sound highly convincing. He moved among the Noldor elves, using his charismatic words to quietly implant poisonous ideas into their minds. He never forced anyone to believe, but skillfully guided them, so that those proud elves would in memory believe that the thoughts were born of their own reasoning. The core lie he spread struck at the deepest anxieties and pride of the Noldor. He claimed that the Valar brought the elves to Aman not out of goodwill, but to hold them as prisoners, with the aim of preventing them from ruling the vast lands of Middle-earth. He further whispered that this abandoned land was actually being prepared by the Valar for the upcoming, more easily controlled, latecomers, men. This claim was highly inflammatory because it touched upon two of the Noldor's sore points. They were indeed cut off from Middle-earth, and they had just learned from the Valar about the impending awakening of men. The fear of being replaced and the resentment of being suppressed spread like wildfire in their hearts. Melkor could always find some willing ears and some tongues that would add to the tale what they had heard, and his lies were thus passed from friend to friend, as a secret that showed the wisdom of the teller. In later days, the Noldor paid a heavy price for their folly in so easily believing his lies. This passage vividly depicts the transmission pattern of information warfare. Lies are packaged as secrets and insider information, satisfying the listener's vanity of feeling superior, thereby accelerating their viral spread. This is not just a narrative from ancient mythology, but a precise insight into human social psychology. As the seeds of suspicion took root and sprouted, Melkor's corruption entered its second stage. He began to teach the Noldor a skill they had never before known: the making of weapons. In the Peace of Valinor, tools made for killing like swords and spears were entirely foreign. However, under Melkor's incitement, the exquisite forging skills of the Noldor began to deviate from the original purpose of creating beauty and turn towards making instruments of destruction. Suddenly, ominous fires burned in the forges of many Noldor. They began to secretly forge swords and helmets, but publicly displayed only magnificent shields painted with their family crests to flaunt their lineage and conceal their true intentions. Each family believed it was the only one to have received the warning and needed to arm itself for protection, which further exacerbated the distrust among them. Fëanor, the most paranoid and skilled among them, built a secret forge in his fortress of Formenos, unknown even to Melkor himself. There, he forged the sharpest, fierce swords and tall helms with red plumes for himself and his 7 sons. His father-in-law, Matan, the great craftsman who had taught him all the skills passed down from Vala, deeply regretted this, lamenting that he had turned the knowledge of creation into a tool for bloodshed. Melkor's lies acted as a catalyst, completely blowing apart the pre-existing cracks within Finwë's family. He spread different rumors to Fëanor and his half-brothers. He told Fëanor that Fingolfin and Finarfin were plotting to usurp his birthright as the eldest son, and wanted to seize the Silmarils, and that they had the tacit approval of the Valar, who were displeased with Fëanor for hoarding the gems. To Fingolfin and Finarfin, he said that the proud Fëanor planned to use his influence over their father Finwë to drive them, the sons of Indis, out of Tirion, the capital of the Noldor. These lies precisely targeted each person's insecurities, and suspicion and hostility reached their peak. The unrest of the Noldor could no longer be concealed. Fëanor began to openly make speeches rebelling against the Valar, claiming he would lead the Noldor to escape their bondage and return to Middle-earth. The worried King Finwë convened a council of his lords to try to quell the turmoil. At the council, Fingolfin stepped forward, pleading with his father to restrain Fëanor's proud words and actions, and assuring Finwë that no matter how Fëanor incited them, he and Finarfin would remain loyal to their father's leadership. Just at that moment, a fully armed Fëanor stormed into the hall. He heard Fingolfin's words, and in his perception twisted by lies, this was clear proof that Fingolfin was trying to slander him before his father and usurp his position. He furiously berated Fingolfin and ordered him to leave. As Fingolfin silently turned and walked out of the hall's great doors, Fëanor followed him and, to the astonishment of all present, drew the sharp sword he had tempered in the secret fires of Formenos. He set the bright point of his sword against Fingolfin's breast. "See, half-brother," he said, "this is sharper than thy tongue. Try but once more to usurp my place and the love of my father, and maybe it will rid the Noldor of one who seeks to be the master of thralls." In the paradise of Valinor, drawing a sword against kin was an unheard-of crime. This scene completely exposed the depth of the corruption within the Noldor. The Valar could no longer stand by. They summoned Fëanor to the Ring of Doom to stand trial. At the trial, Melkor's plot was finally fully exposed, and only then did the Valar realize what a grave mistake they had made by letting the wolf into their house. Tokas immediately set off to capture Melkor, but the cunning Dark Lord had already gone into hiding and was nowhere to be found. Although Melkor was the main culprit, Fëanor was not judged innocent. He had broken the peace of Valinor and threatened his own kin with a weapon. In the end, Mandos decreed that Fëanor must leave the city of Tirion and be exiled for 12 years. Fingolfin immediately stated that he would personally lift his brother's exile after 12 years. But the proud Fëanor did not accept this reconciliation. He went with his 7 sons and his beloved father, King Finwë, to the northern fortress of Formenos, taking the Silmarils with him and locking them in the deep vaults. Ironically, with Fëanor's departure and Finwë's following him, Fingolfin effectively became the regent of the Noldor, who remained in Tirion. Melkor's lie, through Fëanor's own actions, had in a way become reality. Thus the lies of Melkor were made true in seeming. though Fëanor, by his own deeds, had brought this thing to pass. This sentence perfectly highlights the absurdity of this tragedy. The victory of evil is often achieved not through direct conquest, but by inducing good beings to, in the process of combating a false threat, personally bring about the worst outcome that evil had prophesied. What Morgoth did during this period perfectly illustrates a more advanced and modern form of evil. It is not purely physical violence, but an ideological virus capable of corrupting the entire fabric of society. His most powerful weapon was not an army, but information, or more precisely, disinformation. First, Morgoth's strategy demonstrated the immense power of half-truths. The lies he spread were effective not because they were fabricated out of thin air, but because they were built on a foundation of truth, skillfully twisting the motives and intentions of these facts. For example, the Valar did bring the elves to Aman, isolating them from Middle-earth, and men were indeed about to awaken. What Morgoth did was simply to provide a malicious, interpretative framework for these facts. The Valar's motive was imprisonment, rather than protection, and the arrival of men was for replacement, rather than coexistence. Such lies, containing a kernel of truth, are much harder to refute than pure fabrications, because they resonate with the listener's existing knowledge and latent anxieties. This is a classic technique repeatedly used in real-world political propaganda and online rumors. Second, Morgoth demonstrated the power of evil as an ideological corrosion. He did not attack the Noldor directly. Instead, he changed their values. He introduced the concepts of weapons and warfare, twisting the Noldor's prized craft from a tool for creating beauty into a means for serving violence and suspicion. This was a fundamental shift. He corrupted not the bodies of the Noldor, but their minds, their culture. He turned them from a peaceful people pursuing art and knowledge into a divided society, rife with internal suspicion and glorifying force. This shows that the most profound evil is one that changes a group's worldview, causing them to disintegrate from within. Morgoth didn't need to be an enemy to the Noldor. He just needed to convince them to be enemies to each other. Finally, this series of events reveals a complex relationship between free will and external influence. The Noldor were not innocent victims. Their own pride, jealousy, and ambition were the soil in which Morgoth's lies could grow. Fëanor's resentment of his half-brothers and his excessive pride in his own talents already existed. Morgoth was merely a skilled gardener who saw the seeds of these weeds and provided the most suitable sunlight and rain for them to grow. This raises an eternal question. When individuals or groups are manipulated by malicious external information, how much responsibility should their own choices bear? Tolkien does not provide a simple answer, but presents a complex picture. External evil inducements and internal character flaws interact to create tragedy. This makes the fall of the Noldor not just a simple confrontation between good and evil, but a more tragic and profound story about character, choice, and fate. After being sentenced to exile, Fëanor spent a period of resentment and paranoia in the fortress of Formenos. However, even the judgment of the Valar could not completely shut out Melkor's schemes. The Dark Lord, his lies exposed after a period of hiding, suddenly appeared before the gates of Formenos with an unexpected boldness. He once again feigned a friendly face, expressing sympathy for Fëanor's plight and reiterating his offer to help Fëanor escape the shackles of the Valar. He presented himself as a fellow Vala, claiming he best understood the true intentions of the gods who sat on their thrones, trying to win Fëanor's trust. Fëanor's heart, burning with the shame of exile, listened in silence. For a moment swayed. However, Melkor's greed ultimately betrayed him. When he saw Fëanor's hesitation, he could not suppress his inner desire for the Silmarils, and finally uttered the fatal words, "Secure though this fortress be, think not that any treasure is safe in the realm of the Valar." This sentence, like a flash of lightning, tore through all of Melkor's disguises. Fëanor's keen insight instantly penetrated the other's mask, seeing the fierce lust for the jewels deep within his heart. Hatred overwhelmed fear and hesitation, and Fëanor uttered his famous rebuke. "Get thee gone from my gates, thou jail crow of Mandos," he said, and slammed the door of his house in the face of the mightiest of all the dwellers in Ea. Melkor departed in shame and rage, his heart filled with a black flame of vengeance. He knew that the plan to obtain the Silmarils through deception and words had completely failed. So, he turned to a darker, more primal plan. He fled south, evading the pursuit of the Valar, and entered the forgotten dark land at the southernmost tip of Aman, Avathar. It was a place rarely trodden even by the Valar, where shadows were thick and light could not penetrate. In the deep ravines of Avathar, Melkor found the ally he sought, an ancient evil being in the form of a giant spider, Ungoliant. Her origin was a mystery, unknown even to the Valar. Some legends said she came from before the world was made, an incarnation of the discord in the great music of the Ainur. Others believed she was a primeval dark entity that descended from the void surrounding the world. She and Melkor represented two distinctly different forms of evil. Melkor's evil stemmed from pride, jealousy, and the desire to dominate, an evil centered on the self. Ungoliant's evil, on the other hand, was a pure nihilistic hunger, a void that sought only to consume and destroy. She hated light, yet was hopelessly drawn to it, because her nature was to devour light and transform it into an entity called unlight, a darkness capable of consuming all perception and existence. Melkor found the famished Ungoliant and made her an irresistible promise. He said, "Do my bidding, and if thou hunger still when all is done, then I will give thee whatsoever thy lust may demand." Driven by an endless craving for light, Ungoliant agreed to this evil pact. She spun black webs, enveloping herself and Melkor, forming a cloud of unlight that even the gaze of the Valar could not penetrate. Thus, unseen and unheard, they crept back into the heart of Valinor. Maybe she was bred of the mists and the darkness that brewed by the shores of the outer sea, in the uttermost dark between the overthrow of the lamps and the kindling of the trees. But it is more likely that she has always been. This speculation about her origin adds a strong Lovecraftian horror element to her character. She does not belong to the order of this world. She is an alien, incomprehensible, purely negative force. They chose to strike during a grand festival in Valinor. On that day, Manwë, to celebrate the harvest and to heal the rift among the Noldor, had ordered a feast and required Fëanor to attend. All of Valinor was immersed in song and joy, and vigilance was at its lowest. At that moment, the shadow of unlight crept silently up the holy hill of Azelohar. Melkor, the former Vala, now the Dark Lord, holding his black spear, unhesitatingly struck the trunks of the two trees, piercing them to their core. The sap of the golden laurelin and the silver telperion gushed out like blood, flowing over the hill. And Ungoliant lunged forward, thrusting her black beak into the wounds of the trees, greedily sucking up their sap and the life-giving light contained within. She injected her deadly venom into the tissues of the two trees, causing them to wither and rot from within. The light of the two trees rapidly dimmed and was finally extinguished completely. However, Ungoliant's hunger was far from sated. She then crawled to the wells of Varda and drank all the dew of light stored within. With this massive influx of light energy, Ungoliant's body swelled hideously, becoming monstrously large and unimaginably ugly. So much so that even Melkor himself felt fear. As she swelled, she spewed out dense black vapors, which combined with her own unlight to form a blanket of absolute, suffocating darkness that quickly enveloped all of Valinor. The light vanished, followed by a profound, dead silence and an unprecedented terror. The golden age of Valinor, at this moment, came to an abrupt end. Then the unlight of Ungoliant rose up even to the roots of the trees, and Melkor sprang upon the mound. And with his black spear, he smote each tree to its core, wounded them deep, and their sap poured forth as it were their blood, and was spilled upon the ground. But Ungoliant sucked it up, and going then from tree to tree, she set her black beak to their wounds, till they were drained, and the poison of death that was in her went into their tissues and withered them, root, branch, and leaf, and they died. This scene is the source of all sorrows in the First Age. It was not just a physical destruction, but a symbolic one. The light of the two trees represented the blessing, order, and sanctity of Valinor. Their death signified the fall of this perfect world, meaning that evil had achieved a decisive, irreversible victory. The alliance of Ungoliant and Morgoth is not a simple partnership of powerhouses, but a profound dialectical exploration by Tolkien into the nature of evil. It reveals the complex relationship between two different forms of evil. The evil of domination centered on the self, Morgoth, and the evil of consumption centered on nothingness, Ungoliant. Morgoth's evil stems from pride and the infinite magnification of the Master of the self. He desires to create, to rule, to be acknowledged as the Lord of all things. All his actions, whether creating discord in the music or corrupting the elves, are ultimately aimed at proving and expanding his own will. This evil, though immensely destructive, still operates within the framework of existence. What it wants is a world twisted and ruled by him, not a world that does not exist. Ungoliant represents an older, purer evil. She has no self, only desire. She does not want to rule the world, but to devour it. She is a force of entropy, a cosmic power leading towards nothingness. If Morgoth's evil is rebellion, then Ungoliant's evil is negation. Her hatred for and craving of light are a contradiction that embodies the attitude of nothingness towards existence. It must confirm its own nothingness by devouring existence. The alliance of these two reveals a chilling cosmological view. Even the ultimate evil of pride, Morgoth, is threatened by the ultimate evil of nothingness, Ungoliant, a force he cannot truly control. After destroying the two trees, Ungoliant's powers surged, and she immediately turned to attack Morgoth himself, demanding the Silmarils in his hand as payment. At this point, Morgoth, whose power had been greatly dissipated in the corruption of Arda's matter, was weaker than before. He was completely unable to resist Ungoliant's strangulation and only escaped by letting out a world-piercing scream that summoned the Balrogs from the abyss. This episode is crucial. It shows that Morgoth's evil is not the only, or even the most primordial, evil in the universe. There exists a more terrifying, impersonal, purely void-like evil. Morgoth could use this power for his own ends, but he could not master it and was nearly destroyed by it. This adds a layer of profound metaphysical horror to Tolkien's mythology. It tells us that alliances of evil are inherently unstable because the internal logic of evil is to devour and betray. Morgoth thought he was the player, but nearly became Ungoliant's meal. This not only reveals the limits of Morgoth's power, but also hints at a darkness in the universe so deep that even the devil would fear it. Valinor fell into unprecedented darkness and panic. It was not an ordinary night, but a tangible darkness woven from Ungoliant's unlight, capable of devouring senses and hope. The Valar gathered at the Ring of Doom, their sorrow profound, for they knew that once the light of the two trees was gone, it could never be restored by their power alone. Just then, Yavanna, the Vala who had sung the two trees into being, offered a glimmer of hope. She told the Valar that although the trees had withered, their light had not completely vanished from the world. That undefiled, pure light now existed only in the 3 Silmarils made by Fëanor. She believed that if Fëanor would surrender the jewels, allowing her to break them and release the light within, she might be able to heal the two trees and bring light back to Valinor. Thus, all eyes turned to Fëanor. Manwë himself made the request. It was an incredibly heavy request, asking an artist to destroy his own greatest masterpiece. Fëanor's heart struggled in agony. His pride, his possessiveness of the Silmarils, and his deep-seated distrust of the Valar all peaked at this moment. He remembered the lies Melkor had whispered in his ear. That the Valar coveted his jewels. After a long silence, Fëanor let out a cry of pain. He declared that he could not create such works again, that to break them would be to break his own heart, and he would die from it, becoming the first of the elves to be slain in Aman. For the less and the greater, they are things that a man may do but once only, and in that deed his heart is consumed. I might unwind my jewels, but I should never again make their like, and if I must break them, I shall break my heart, and I shall be slain, the first of all the Eldar in Aman. In his view, the Valar's request was tantamount to murder. He loudly refused them, declaring that if the Valar forced him, it would prove they were of the same kin as Melkor. His words, filled with grief, anger, and paranoia, echoed in the dark Ring of Doom. Yet, at the very moment he made this decision, a more terrible piece of news, like a poisoned arrow, sped from the north, completely shattering his world. While the heart of Valinor was being swallowed by darkness, Morgoth and Ungoliant did not linger. They raced north to Fëanor's fortress, Formenos. There lay the ultimate goal of their journey. King Finwë, High King of the Noldor, Fëanor's beloved father, upon hearing of the disaster in Valinor, did not fall into panic like the others. Instead, he remained at Formenos alone, guarding his son's fortress and treasures. He did not flee the approaching terrifying darkness, but chose to stand his ground. Morgoth descended upon the gates of Formenos. There, he fought with King Finwë. Though valiant, Finwë could not withstand the wrath of the mightiest of the Valar. Morgoth slew Finwë before his gates, spilling the first blood in the blessed realm of Aman. He was the first elf to be murdered since the creation of Arda. Paradise was no longer pure. But Melkor was there, and he came to the house of Fëanor, and there he slew Finwë, king of the Noldor, before his doors, and spilled the first blood in the blessed realm. For Finwë alone had not fled from the horror of the dark. This brief account contains endless tragedy. Finwë's death was not just the fall of a king, it symbolized the end of an era. The golden age of peace, eternity, and no shadow of death completely ended as Finwë's blood stained the steppes of Formenos. After slaying Finwë, Morgoth broke into the treasury of Formenos. He plundered all of Fëanor's collections, sweeping away the gems accumulated by the Noldor for generations. Finally, he stretched out his evil hands and seized the 3 Silmarils. The sacred hallowing of Varda manifested at this moment. When Morgoth's hands touched the Silmarils, they shone with a burning light, as if they were living things fighting back. His hands were severely burned, turning black, and an unquenchable, searing pain would accompany him forever. Yet, he endured this immense pain, clutched the Silmarils tightly, and did not let go. Just then, messengers from Valinor arrived with the terrible news of Formenos' fall. They told the assembly at the Ring of Doom of King Finwë's death and the theft of the Silmarils. When Fëanor heard this, he was overcome by immense grief and rage. He stood up and uttered a terrible curse. He cursed Melkor and, for the first time, called him by the name that would later echo throughout Middle-earth. Morgoth, meaning the black foe of the world. From that moment on, the name Melkor was forgotten in the elven tongues. They only used that new, hate-filled name to refer to him. Fëanor's grief was so profound that he ran from the Ring of Doom on the spot, disappearing into the boundless night. Then Fëanor ran from the Ring of Doom and fled into the night. For his father was dearer to him than the light of Valinor or the peerless works of his hands. And who among sons of elves or of men have held their fathers more dear? This sentence is the key to understanding all of Fëanor's subsequent madness. His motivation at this moment underwent a fundamental shift. The death of Finwë is one of the most important turning points in the entire story of the Silmarillion. It instantly transformed a cosmic struggle of light versus darkness, order versus chaos, into a deeply personal, irreconcilable blood feud. This transformation, while making Fëanor's subsequent actions objectively proud and mad, subjectively imbued them with the color of tragic heroism and made his fate inevitable. Before this, Morgoth's main conflict was with the Valar. His corruption of the Noldor was largely a means to his greater end of overthrowing the rule of the Valar. Although the Silmarils were Fëanor's greatest treasure, the struggle for them still fell within the realm of property and power. However, the death of Finwë personalized everything. Morgoth not only stole Fëanor's treasures, he murdered his father. The text explicitly states, his father was dearer to him than the light of Valinor or the peerless works of his hands. This means that the emotional engine driving Fëanor and the Noldor's rebellion was, from this moment on, no longer just the pride of reclaiming treasure, but the duty of avenging a father. In the context of heroic myth, a blood debt must be paid in blood is a supreme moral imperative with absolute binding force. Fëanor's naming of Morgoth was itself an act filled with personal hatred. He branded a cosmic enemy with the mark of a personal foe. This transformation explains why the subsequent actions of Fëanor and his sons were so extreme and fanatical, even to the point of kinslaying and defying the will of the gods. Their oath, though centered on the Silmarils, was fueled by the burning rage of avenging Finwë. This elevates their story from a simple cautionary tale about greed to a profound classical tragedy about love, loss, grief, and revenge. Fëanor's original sin, his pride and possessiveness, became intertwined with his deepest love, his love for his father, jointly pushing him onto the tragic path to glory and destruction. This also provides a reference for understanding the origins of many large-scale conflicts in human history. Behind grand ideological struggles often burn specific, personal, emotional flames. The tragedy of one person, amplified by power and rhetoric, can ultimately evolve into the disaster of an era. Tonight's story ends here. The night is already deep, and the world outside is likely already asleep. Those ancient conflicts, those burning hatreds and sorrows, are for now wrapped in the quiet darkness. You can imagine, in that land of Valinor, shrouded in unlight, all is silent. Only the wind weeps. In the eyes of the elves who had once seen the light of the two trees, a shadow is now forever left, one that could never be erased. And Fëanor, that spirit of fire, the creative flame in his heart, had now turned into a pyre of vengeance, about to burn himself and all that he held dear. But that is a story for tomorrow, or rather, for another age. For now, let this heavy history settle slowly with your breath. Let it become the backdrop of your dreams, a distant and blurry silhouette. Your consciousness, like a small boat, gently sways on the calm, dark water, moving further and further from the shore, further from the clamor and strife. You are very tired now. Let your body relax completely, and let your thoughts gradually blur. The darkness is gentle. It envelops you like a mother's embrace. In the harbor of dreams, there are no storms, no oaths, only peace. Good night.